Hey everyone, so in this video I'll be going over how you can make some grape wine. So I was gifted some wild grapes that I've had in the freezer for a while now. I got about a pound of frozen grapes here and then a couple ingredients that I will be using to make wine. So as you can see here, these are wild grapes. They have a bit of a different flavor than your store-bought grapes. They're usually pretty sour, and in order to make the wine taste a little bit better and for the fermentation process, I'm going to be adding cane sugar to it. This will be also used for the yeast, and then I will also be adding some black tea to add tannins, raisins for nutrients for the yeast, and then I'll be adding some active dry yeast for champagne to make this brew. You can use any yeast in general. This is just the one I had on hand. In terms of equipment that you'll need, pretty much just something to measure out the sugar and a brewing vessel. It's pretty simple. I like just using a big 2-gallon jar generally for these with an airlock. So for this recipe, I will be using about 2 gallons of water that I'll just measure out in my brewing vessel. So I'll add the 2 gallons of water to a large pot and I'll add the grapes to it. And then what I'll do is I'll let this come to a simmer. I try not to boil it too harshly or not let it get to a full boil. So I'll usually add everything. As you can see, I just threw all the grapes in here. It was taking way too long just trying to take all the stems and leaves out of them. So I'll filter that out later. So for this brew, I simmered them for around an hour and a half to 2 hours and just consistently stirred them while they were simmering. So while everything is simmering on the stove, I'll add 2 plain black tea bags to a cup and just let that brew so that we can add tannins to it later. So towards the end of the simmering, around probably an hour in, I'll add some raisins. This is just to add some nutrients for the yeast later on when we start brewing. What you're going to want to do is just sterilize everything, your brewing vessels, and then I will also sterilize this pot here. It's what I'll be using to basically filter out all the stems and leaves from the wild grapes. Once everything is done simmering on the stove, we can now filter this out. So while I'm basically getting all the stems and leaves out, I'll also kind of squish down the grapes just to get all the juice and everything that I can out of them. Once you're done with that, you could just add the cup of tea and then 1 cup of sugar, and then give it all a good stir. Once all the ingredients are combined, you can add it to the brewing vessel. Be sure to sterilize it, of course, before adding everything in. So after adding everything together, it should still be pretty hot, so I'm just going to put the airlock on the top with the lid and just kind of let it cool down. This might take a couple hours or so, but once it's fully cooled down, I'm going to add the yeast and give it a good shake. After adding the yeast, I'm just going to place it in a cabinet somewhere dark where sunlight's not hitting it, and since this is wine, you can let it sit for quite a while. I think I let mine sit for about 4 weeks, but you could go upwards to 2 months, probably even more. But what I look for is initially you're gonna have a lot of bubbles and a lot of activity, but once the yeast starts dying off, you'll get like this film on the bottom and you won't see as many bubbles anymore, and that's when you can tell the brew is slowing down and it's just about ready. The yeast have done their thing. So here we are about 4 weeks in and it's looking pretty good, so let's get to bottling. So before we start bottling, I like to just sterilize all my bottles just to keep everything clean and you don't get any unwanted bacteria or things growing in your brew. So for bottling, I usually use one of these siphons. I just got it off Amazon. They're relatively cheap and easy to get. All you have to do is put it in the brew jar and just pump it a little and it should start filling up your jars. And in terms of jars, I just use whatever I have. I'm using like an old wine bottle and some other jars that I had laying around. just be sure that they are sterilized. Alright, so with this brew, I got quite a few bottles of wine. I just kept them in the fridge just so that they last a bit longer. Overall, it was a pretty good success, especially for having these just frozen in a freezer for actually quite a long time. So I was surprised it fully made some pretty decent wine. It was pretty sour in taste. I think that's because I just used 1 cup of sugar for this recipe, so there wasn't like a whole lot of sweetness, and usually these wild grapes are generally more sour in flavor, but I kind of like that. I'm not like a super big fan of sweet wine, so if you want it to be sweeter, I'd recommend upping the amount of sugar, maybe the 2 or 3 cups for this brew. But overall, it turned out pretty nicely. Let me know if y'all make it and what you think, and I'll talk to y'all next time.